Saturnastra, chapter 17. Brunhilda. Since he had caused her to drop her book, she would make him drop something he liked. She looked at him from head to toe, and then she swiftly took his hat and she jumped on it until it was flatter than a pancake. And he frowned, and his hand reached for her hairnet, but Brunhilda anticipated that response, and she jumped backwards and landed on her behind. Brunhilda was not used to bickering in her human form, and not waiting for her to get up, he ran towards her and he took her hairnet before she had a chance to get up, and laughing he ran away from the girl, and she ran after him, yelling. And while running after him, she tripped on her dress, and her instinct made her give a four-legged step, and she incorporated herself quickly, realizing her mistake. And to the onlookers, it seemed like she had tripped and had done an awkward cat run to incorporate herself. And when she saw that she could not catch him in her curving form, she did what all feral little babies did when they ran into trouble. Brunhilda took a deep breath, and she screeched. To make more emphasis, she shook her tiny fist in anger, and Mother could feel that Brunhilda was about to throw a tantrum, and he, feeling sorry for the girl, returned her hairnet, and he also walked over to where her book and pencil had fallen, and he returned them as well. Brunhilda put it on her hairnet, and then she lifted her head proudly, and she showed her canines to he, and she swept dust with her shoes, and she threw it in his direction. And dragons did this whenever their pride was insulted. And to show that he was sorry, he gave an unnatural low bow with his hands outstretched, and this was the universal dragon apology pose. And Brunhilda turned around not to look at he, and she left with her nose held high, and she then left the courtyard without looking back. And when she left, he picked up the redness of his hat, and she shook his head smiling, and then he walked over to the hole he had made and threw dirt over it, partially sealing it. Afterwards, he shook his hat twice in the air, and it regained its original shape. And he put it on his hat, and he started making his way towards the stable, and he smiled when he noticed his stalker following close behind. And he pretended not to notice it until he gave a quick turnaround, and this startled Brunhilda, who snapped. And then he folded his arms, and he rested his back against the wall, and he waited for the girl to get closer, and Brunhilda bit her lower lip, approaching slowly. And the Duke asked Mildred, "Where is the girl's mother?" And Mildred simply shrugged his shoulders in response, and he had suspected that the girl was his daughter, and he did remember he had a fling with Flaminka once. However, he had heard that he was her son, and for reasons he did not understand, he smelled like he could be his son, and his senses told him that he was a distant blood relative. However, his instinct told him that he was not of this world, and these discrepancies made him give the dragon much to think about. And originally he had visited the castle to meet the infamous Ahi, and he was curious to meet his so-called son, and he also wanted Brunhilda to meet her brother, and aside from her father and a few pet pudgy dragons, Brunhilda did not interact with others of her kind. Since she had feral blood, Brunhilda was untamable, and even her father had a hard time controlling her temper. And the common logic was that female dragons would rear their young, and being a male dragon meant that mother could not relate to his child, and this was true among most dragon kings. And there were other dragons that reared the young together, like pudgy dragons and the alabaster dragon. And Besame had let Mildred keep the dragonet to watch him squirm. Mildred insisted on taking care of her out of a strange paternal sense of duty he had picked up from the humans. And indeed, Mildred had lived far too long among humankind. And the Duke suggested, "I know how much of a playboy you are, but you should really consider finally getting married. The girl is too weird, and it is your fault. It may be cute now, but when she grows up, nobody's going to marry her." "Thank you for your unsolicited advice," said Mildred in a soft hissing whisper. And Matilda got bored watching him and Brunhilda after 40 minutes, and she said to herself before departing, "That girl is not human." And since Brunhilda was not coming closer, he went to her and took her hand, and Brunhilda gave a sideways look showing she did not get it, and he also gave her a sideways look to show that he shared her perplexity. Year 11, month 4, day 21, 3:17 a.m. Besame arrived late, like Mildred had predicted, And we spent all day trading Bertram and he to see if anything interesting would happen. And much to our chagrin, he ignored Bertram's presence almost altogether. It almost seemed as if he was avoiding Bertram. And Bertram was too busy being keen to pay attention to he. And for the time, Bertram he was simply a pebble in his path, a piece of a puzzle that did not fit together. And tonight the pair happened to coincide in one location. And Bertram was on his way to the treasure room, and he was on his way to the dungeon, and Bertram's massive form made it so hard that he had to lower his head a bit while walking the hallways of the citadel. And he had the ears of an elf, the bulkiness of a dwarf, and at 12 feet he was almost a giant, and his eyes were large, almost and shaped like those of the nymphs, and they changed color depending on his mood. And his short hair was an unnatural blood red color, and his face was strong, no jaws and all. And it was the sort of face you could not look at up for very long. And he knew this, and he reveled in the effect that his face caused. Since Bertram was not in a worrying kind of mood, he sported a blood-red noble outfit, and his usual intimidating face looked bored and somewhat sleepy. And he yawned as he walked through the empty hallways, and he stopped and he yawned again. And he felt something small scurrying past his leg, and turning around he saw he had passed by his side. And Bertram's eye turned a misty blue as he thought that was probably a cat, and focusing his gaze more, Bertram noticed that his blood-red hair, and he said to he, "Boy, come here." And he turned around when he heard Bertram speaking to him, and he gave him a sideways look, and he shrugged his shoulder, and Bertram beckoned he to draw closer with his hand, and he came to stand in front of the king. And the size difference between he and Bertram was staggering, and he was only as tall as Bertram's knee. And to look at him better, Bertram sat down on the ground, and he said to he while yawning, "This all causes her real pain." And he passed his hand over the wall before continuing, "A poor design built with poor materials, and this hunk of junk could fall apart at any minute. The useless home of a useless pawn." And he frowned and said to Bertram, "You're a pawn too." And Bertram's eyes changed to pitch black, and he rested his hand on his hair, and he petted it. And then he closed his hands tighter on his head, and he lifted him by the head to see him eye to eye. He said, and he said in a soft whisper, "Who are you? Why is your hair blood red?" And he responded to the pain by laughing, and his laughter echoed in the darkness. And Bertram grew furious, and he started to squeeze harder, and his skull did not break, though the skin did. And Bertram released his hand in pain, and his body fell limp on the ground. And he slowly lifted himself off the ground for effect, and he took a proud stance. And his face was very covered in his own blood, and Bertram felt his blood in his hand, and he had the same corrosive blood that flowed through his veins. His face whitened, and then he said, "It can't be. You are just like me." And Castor laughed cynically, and he said to Bertram, pointing at his shed, "So Libra rules curse you as well. You should never have gotten involved with that creature." And Bertram gave a sideways look, and he yawned as he got up from the floor, and he craned his ear before saying, And Castor folded his arms, and he continued, "Look at you, completely tame, and you used to be the cool blood red, and now you're just a shadow of your former self." And Bertram was not the kind of man to take criticism with a straight face, and he was not used to being talked down to someone who was smaller than himself. And he reacted the same way he reacted to anyone who dared to stand up against him. And he stepped over as if he was a small critter, and he kept stepping on into a bloody pile remain. And he grew angry when he felt that his blood could run in the soles of his shoes, and all the while his laughter echoed in the darkness. And he said to himself, "Stupid brat, damn you." And Castor said to him, "Is that really all we have?" Well, the pity. All that remained when Bertram was done was a pile of blood and raw skin. The blood seeped into the stone and to the underground levels, and Bertram continued on his path as if nothing had happened. And he fancied that he was technically dead, so he dismissed the kid from his thoughts. And he knew that he was lying to himself. Still, he was not in the mood for dealing with whatever he was. Yes, he was irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, a pebble in his shoes, nothing more. He watched Bertram pass by while hiding beneath the ground, and he recreated his form when Bertram was at an adequate distance. And he looked in the direction of Bersamin, and he gave him a sideways look before pouting. And then he continued on his way towards the dungeon, and like all feral dragons, he had a strong regenerative properties, although this was just a little on the extreme. Thus it was quite normal for a thing for back in our home world. And while he walked, Bersamin had arrived to the treasure room, and the guard watching the room was sleeping on duty, and Bersamin shook his head and yawned. And he took the keys to the vault from his pocket, and he opened the door and took a peripheral view within. And things were just as he had expected. And the king shook his head and took a deep breath, and he held his hand to his chest and said, "Another useless pawn. This world could have true peace, if only, but the flesh is stubborn and the heart is weak." And now he had entered his dungeon, and the dungeon had a new additions, including a tear-glass chandelier, mirrors with candles standing before them, and crystals and marbles scattered all over the floor, and a chest filled with dried meat. And then he sat down on the floor to play with his marble, and the marbles were a gift given to him by Mordred, and his so-called father had noticed that he liked shiny round things, and he bought them in town for some children. And the children were sure salesmen, and they had bled Mordred to the bone, and he ended up paying 1 gold coin for a common marble, and five coins for a special marble, and 10 for a rarity. And to Mordred, all of these marbles looked pretty much the same, except for their interior. Still, he did not like to argue with lesser beings, and he resolved to eat those brats the first time he got, because he'd be a dragon, he'd be like, "I'll just murder them later." And he liked the marbles, and some had interiors like kaleidoscope, and what he liked best was the sound that they made when they struck the walls, and he used to throw them all over the place, and before doing so, he would make certain that there were no holes for the marbles to fall into. And then he started throwing his marbles all over the place until he forgot to close the door, and when he didn't notice, he swiftly went to chase after the marble that had gotten away. And then he ran after the marble with his hands outstretched, while he yelled, "Sorrow, come back!" And he had named all of his marbles, including one that he called Sorrow. And while he showed such a name bewilders us and time again against protocol, he would have given us the same answer had we asked him why he had called the marble like that. Anyhow, he chased after his favorite marble, and the marble eventually entered the hallway and rolled around the floor. And suddenly Wicked Sorrow stood before us and said, "Guys, you think I'm stupid?" And marble just don't bounce up the stairs and stop interfering with the story. So yeah, like the narrator people were using telekinesis to make the marble like move away from the heat, because they found it amusing to like see him running around and stuff. Because the narrators be documentary alien type of people with cameras, and then they just watching the show. Just reminding you of that. Like we had planned, the marble rolled in front of Bersamin, who was making his way to this room, and he heard the weird sound of the marble rolling over the tile, and he also felt like he had stepped on something, and he lifted up his foot and saw the marble, and he groaned as he hunched over to pick it up, and he brought it close to his side, and he frowned. "Marble, and who is playing with marbles at this time of night?" And he looked down, and he felt something was clinging to his leg, and when he had finally made it to Bersamin's hand, he came face to face with the man again. And then Bersamin Johnny said, "And you, and what are you doing here?" And he allowed for him to recover his marble. As he struck by an idea, Bersamin punched his palm before saying, "Punching bag, you're a punching bag, and I can strike you all day, but you will not simply bounce back like a punching bag, will you?" And then he looked at us and said, "And you, don't think I will allow myself to be manipulated by you creepy little will-o-wisps, and everything always goes my way in the end." And we fled when we saw that we had been seen. Only Wicked Sophie remained. Bersamin stared back at Wicked Sophie, and the pair said nothing to each other, and he smiled and said, "That is more likely. Just stay there and do nothing like proper will-o-wisps that you are." And we asked Wicked Sophie, "How can he see us?" The Berserker Blondla was cursed with truth by the abandoned Libra, and even if abandoned gets killed, the curse could never be lifted, explained Sophie. We see. So is that the reason why he can see us? Pretty much. Our team split into two fields, and the first one went to check on Bersamin, the man who had just entered his room, and he sat on his bed to smile for his side, and the wound groaned, and the wood echoed his groan. And Bersamin pushed his short hair back from his face and said, "At this rate, I am going to end up sleeping on the floor." And he yawned again, and he thought How long has it been since I was last called blood red? I don't know. And then there was silence, and Bersamin started bleeding from all of his pores, and he crawled into a fetus position like a child, and the entire bed turned red. And the more he bled, the more the bed and the floor corroded, and even his surface started corroding. And Bersamin said nothing while he occurred. He just kept thinking, it burns, it burns. And his frame burned and corroded to reveal as his smaller true form. And the man caught up in the bloody bed was 5'7", and his body was slender and hardly muscular, and he looked so fragile and weak, covered in his own blood. And his face was handsome with large, beautiful eyes, and his hair had short, delicate curves, so unlike his previous pointed knife ears. His face was also weirdly similar to a he, and what we found most charming was his delicate, small hands and feet. And he had lady fingers, and his feet were somewhat small for his size, and despite having the size of an average adult, Bersamin still retained his boyish charms. And the blood started swirling around him as if it had a life of its own, and he said to his blood, enough already. And the blood settled down, and then he said, not you, the will-o-wisp. And they won't leave me alone today. They never leave me alone, always watching but never saying or doing anything. Well, we've seen that they will have developed a different hobby. We lingered a little, but eventually we decided that we had seen enough. And Sophie suddenly stopped and I, where's Fiji? I thought he was with you, we said. And Fiji had passed to the ground and said, you're not going to believe what I just saw. Show us, show us. And we saw Matilda sleeping in her bed, and a single drop of the blood fell on her head, and she woke up and she started yelling. And what the hell, that man on here, you crazy psycho, who asked on my forehead, you could have blinded me. And again another droplet fell, this one on her hand. And then she noticed that the curtain was completely red, and parallel to this event, as he was on his way to the dungeons. And when he got inside, he saw Matilda setting a tray of food on the floor of the nightstand, and next to his spout, and Matilda was wearing her night dress, and she had been awoken early by Brunhilda, who annoyed her for 2 hours until she figured out that he was hungry. And Brunhilda even had to draw her 3 pictures to show Matilda what she wanted, and this was not an unusual request. And sometimes he felt like eating a lot of hours, and she was just one who always cooked the kid his meal, because he would not eat anything made by anyone else. And it was both flattering but also annoying, especially at this ungodly hour. And Matilda yawned and started to leave, and after leaving his food, and he got up and stood in the doorway, blocking Matilda's exit. And Matilda said, shoo, let me pass, I'm sleepy. And he said to her, no, you're not going. And Matilda raised her skirt and walked over him, and in response he held onto her leg, and he yelled, don't go, please stay. And Matilda grasped when she saw his cyan color, the color of cyan, and she stopped and walked away and said, what the hell? And she only noticed the change for a brief second, and she blinked, and his eyes were back to normal. And as it always happens in such a case, Matilda pretended that the eyes had played tricks on her, and most humans tend to ignore the bizarre omens and portents and prophecies. And they would rather pretend that their eyes were playing tricks on them than accept the truth, and he eventually decided to let Matilda pass. And he lingered a little as he watched her walk away, and he whispered to himself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then he nodded to himself and strode along, and Matilda entered her room and closed the curtains, and she was soon fast asleep. And as he passed in front of her door as he continued his countdown, and close to the end he felt a strange presence, like a water dropper, and Arasa lazily passed to the roof, and he frowned when he saw he, and he said, I go weary of your interferences. And he folded his arm, and he hissed at Arasa, and Arasa too showed his fangs as he hissed at he. And he simply stood there and waited, and Arasa started choking him, and he started laughing, and the grief relaxed as he coiled, and he said to he, I see, so that's what you are. I suppose I can't kill you outside of my domain. And if you are to die, it will be by another hand, such is my frustration with creatures such as you. And Matilda struggled under her bedsheets, and she put a pillow over her head to drown out the noise that he was making, and in response he kept laughing, and he had to hold on to his eyes to keep himself from falling apart. And Arasa narrowed his eyes, and he said, you disgust me, hypocrites, you, they're standing in my way, and not even the animals eat their own, but you. And Arasa spat venom on the floor before saying, you win this fight, little dragon. No, human. And my words, one day it won't, and I shall make you slay the one closest to your heart, and in death that person will be mine forever. Arasa lazily started to fly up the roof, and as his presence departed, he said, "I wonder if you can eat them as well." And when Arasa left, he looked startled, and he had barely understood half of what that creature had hissed, but he knew that he had been cursed, but did not understand the nature of that curse. And he lifted around the towel from the floor and was lost from sight. And when I entered the room, it looked like a bad horror movie, and everything was covered in blood. And the one white curtain was stained red with blood, and I passed through the tainted veil, and now we were all together to watch the scene of Matilda being burned to death by blood-red corrosive blood, and some of us seemed reluctant to be there, and the blood drops were burning through our spherical armors. And we observed Matilda's worried expression, and she pulled out her bedsheets over her head in a vague attempt to protect herself from the occasional droplet. And according to our estimates, the curtains were going to completely corrode in 30 seconds, and by the 15th second, Matilda felt the ground rumbling beneath her, and his hands had reached down and dragged her away from danger. And if I had caused the woman to faint, it would have fallen after the bear, but the ground below us was quickly sealed away. Alright, so that's the end of that chapter. Bye-bye and God bless.